Hello, and welcome to another Inkarnate live stream. My name is Mati. Today, we're going to be creating mangrove swamps. This is basically a continuation of our How to Create Realistic Water kind of series. In the last one, we covered rivers and coastline. In this one, we're going to be covering mangrove swamps. So in this stream, we're going to basically be learning a little bit about mangroves, and then taking that information, and then using that to recreate the mangrove swamp in the tool. So that's what we're doing today. Sounds like fun. We only have just one real quick announcement. And we'll go ahead up to the notification bell in the top right corner, see what's new if you hover over the icon. And we released some new textures and did some changes. We got some new textures that look really, really nice, both for regional, parchment, fantasy world. We've done some restructuring. Go check out that announcement. All right, that's it. Go ahead and clone and edit this map. You'll find the link to that map in the chat. Go ahead and click that, clone that, and follow along. I'm going to go ahead and edit and open it up and get started. Now, mangrove swamps are a really interesting biome to have an encounter on because it's mostly water, so it adds a challenge to that encounter, and it makes your players have to think in different ways. So different environments create different types of combat, and that's what's going to make it kind of interesting here. Now, once this opens up, we'll kind of go over exactly what a mangrove is, how it operates. If there's anything that I mention about the mangrove or anything that I missed, feel free to share whatever information you have about mangroves in the chat, because hey, we're all learning here, including myself. So I'm excited about that. Okay, let's go ahead and remove the title. Let's first just kind of go over a diagram and talk a little bit about how mangroves operate. Now, mangroves are in what's called a intertidal zone, which means it interacts with the tide, the low and the high tide. And it's a really kind of a unique and different from normal kind of swamps where the trees here have adapted to kind of operating differently with salt water. Normally, trees would not be able to survive within salt water. The salinity level of the soil just doesn't allow for those trees to grow. Hey, first time chatter, glad that you're here. But some trees have kind of adapted to kind of work with this environment. And one of them is that they've kind of caused the root system. They have a root system that's kind of propped up and above the high tide. And so that way it doesn't get wet and soaked with salt water. And another way that they've kind of done it is through what's called pneumatophores. Pneumatophores, and they're basically like roots that stick out and reach up, and they kind of go up and reach out, and so during low tide, oxygen can kind of reach the tree. So there's different ways in which these trees have kind of evolved. And now that we kind of know a little bit about the mangrove and how it kind of operates and knowing what kind of trees there is, that kind of information will help us to figure out what we're going to put in the map. So we know we're going to have some kind of swamp tree. We know we're going to see prop roots for some. We're going to see pneumatophores in some spots. So we're going to have to figure out stamps that are going to represent all this stuff. Okay, and then we're going to also show basically how to show low tide, high tide, how to show the transparency or the translucency of the water, how much opacity it is, how opaque it is, and then all kinds of fun stuff. So let's go ahead and jump in with that. Now that you know a little bit about mangroves, let's go ahead and remove the diagram. First thing that we're probably going to end up doing is putting together some groups. And this way, we don't have to make in each individual tree and everything. We can make 3 different groups, 3 different tree groups, and then copy and paste, and you can change the size and randomly rotate them so that they look like they're different trees. Hey, first time chatter, awesome. Mangrove swamps are like one of my favorite biomes. Let's go ahead and change our background color too. I'm going to go into my favorites. One thing that you should do is that whenever you're using a texture and you have any intention of changing it in any way, make sure you favorite it. So I kind of picked this watercolor, this water texture, I favorited it, and then I took these forest textures, and then I went ahead and changed the rotation for each one to kind of break it up, and then I favorited those as well. Let's stick with just making the whole background water. So The quick fill trick is pretty easy. You just go ahead and use this rectangle shape, drag the cursor all the way across the screen until it's covered up, and then just press apply. And of course, make sure it's set to the BG layer because that's the layer that we're using right here. And you're going to see that something interesting happened with the tree. So what we're trying to reproduce here is maybe the prop roots that are propping up the tree's root system so that it doesn't get submerged in salt water. So let's open up one of these tree groups and I'll show you how I made one and how easy it is to put it together. Basically, I took a tree stump, I turned off the object shadow. Another first-time chatter, welcome. You're going to just use a basic root, and you're not going to change the blend mode for that. But you're going to take a bare branched tree, and I'll go ahead and put the blend mode back to normal so you know what it looks like right here. And you change the blend mode to luminosity, and the luminosity blend mode is going to take whatever texture is below the stamp. It's going to pick up that color. That's why those prop up roots, those root systems, look like they're underwater. It's because I've taken that blue, taken the luminosity blend mode, so it'll pick up that same texture. And I've done some changes in the advanced settings under HSBC filter. HSBC is hue, saturation, brightness, contrast. I brought the contrast down. Let me put the contrast all the way back up. If the contrast is all the way up, it kind of doesn't look like it's underwater, right? But if you drop the contrast, it's going to take those harsh, darker lines and kind of tone them down a little bit. So whenever you want to portray something underwater, luminosity blend mode, and just drop the contrast a little bit so that way it looks like it's kind of, the water is obscuring some of that root system. Now, once you've made one, you're going to select both that. Select the big tree, select the root and the bare branch tree that you can find, and you're going to group them and then label them. And since there's only 3 stumps, you'll notice that I have 3 different types of trees, and they've been labeled big tree, medium tree, small tree. Then you group each one, and so it's in each individual group, and you label them. And in that way, you can just copy paste them to create the shape of the mangrove. Before you kind of start placing down stamps for the positioning part, you pull up the grid. And the grid is going to help you to figure out where to place things. And the grid is really, really helpful. Now, for this one, I've used 20 by 15. So that creates lots of space for your players to maneuver and move around. And then now you can start to select those tree groups and then rescale them by size to figure out what size that you want them to be. So if I move this over, if I want the trunk to be 5 by 5 feet or around there, then I can just scale it down and then place it in a square. Now, by placing it in a square like that, it's kind of very clear that players won't be able to walk in that space. They won't be able to walk in that space. It's kind of obvious because there's a stump there, right? But they will be able to walk around without any confusion the surrounding area around the stump. That's why it's important to use the grid to both use it as a reference for scale but also placement of where you place things, so that way you're not like, well, wait a minute, this tree stump is half in a square and half out. Does that mean both squares are not accessible to a player? Whatever. If you do this, it's going to be so much easier because now you'll know for sure the kind of placement and where your players can go. So you'll start scaling basically each one of these to kind of fit the size that you want. You can make it a huge tree if you want, make it take up, 20 feet. I mean, it's fantasy, so you can make your tree as big as you want. The tree stump, remember, we're trying to make it realistic, but we're going to add a fantasy element. That's the trick. Both realism, so that the players look at it and say, oh, wow, that's believable, but an element of fantasy that also captures them and captivates them. Oh, look at this massive tree. It's absolutely beautiful, right? So use both realism and fantasy, function and fantasy, and that way it kind of makes it better for an experience for your players. Okay, so now that we've kind of put each one together, you figured out how I did each together, and we can actually open up one of these. Let me open up one of these tree groups and One thing you could also do is if you wanted to show that the root system is outside of the water, is you could go in and use thorns. We can add a third element to this group. Let's see here, thorn. There it is right there. If you wanted to show some of the root system showing out of the water, you could place the root like this, or just get a larger one. That might be too small. Let's just go ahead and select that thorn bush. We're going to delete that, and let's use a different one. Oopsie, that's not what I want. We'll get a large enough one so that you can kind of see the roots. And if the color, if it looks a little too bright in comparison, you can always bring the brightness down so that the wood color somewhat matches the stump. And that way you have roots sticking out of the water that are protected, because that's really what the prop up roots are for, is to make sure that the root system is protected, right? So that's one other thing you can do as well. But I'm going to have some of them probably not have that, just so that I can put some docks and things like that, because you're going to want to have a human element as well and some place for your players to walk around. Let's go ahead and remove the tree groups, and then let's go ahead and just put together those trees. And I want you to look carefully. How I set it up is with a battle map. It's always nice to have a couple things. One is going to have a central piece, something that's the center focus. Okay, that center focus is that largest tree, and it's kind of somewhat central. It's not perfectly centered, which is good. You don't want it perfectly centered. Whatever your center piece is, you want it slightly off-centered, whether to the left or the right. And then I've kind of arranged the trees in a way that kind of frame or encapsulate or encircle the focal point. Okay? That's not too hard to figure out. And then also look very carefully at how I've set up each tree. Again, it's in the grid space. So it's very clear, making movement very easily defined. It's not difficult for when you decide to play this in a VTT, or you apply, if you print it out and play it on a tabletop with your friends. So whichever option it is, it's very clear that what your players' movement are. Okay, now I want you to notice some things that we did here, some extra things. It's those I believe it's pneumatophores, or the pneumophores. I used mugs. Let me zoom in real quick and you take a look. I took mugs from our tavern set and then just kind of used them as those special breathing roots. Now, I don't know if they're actually supposed to have a opening in the center, but just for fun, I've just used the mugs, and those will work just fine to kind of represent those. So you've encircled the whole thing, and once you've done that, then you can consider adding in some texturing. Now remember, I've saved a lot of my textures here. I'm using these forest texture, the forest floor, because what's a great idea with the forest floor is that at a lower opacity, you could make it look like there's fallen branches, some moss or whatever kind of growing underneath. And so you just select that texture, and it's just this fall. I think it's, let me check to make sure that I have the proper name for it. I believe it's called Fallen Forest. Hey, first time chatter, welcome, Whitebeard. Let's go ahead and go in and show the names. And I believe, let me just type in, and I want to make sure that you know which one it is exactly. And it's called Forest Floor. That'll work just fine. Now, just so you know, whenever you're using stamps and you select the overall stamp scale, like let's say the stamp is at, the majority of stamps are around 60 to 70%, you're probably going to want to take the textures you use and scale them down to around 60% as well. Now, when you're painting the forest floor, or the, shall we say, swamp, the mangrove swamp floor, make sure that you have it set to the circle brush. Make sure the softness is all the way up, and you drop the opacity. And a decent place to do it is around 0.3%. And it's going to take multiple brush strokes. It's never going to be just one stroke and be perfect, because multiple strokes means more transition between that blue water texture that we've used as our base and, of course, the green grass or that green forest floor texture. Now, I'll go ahead and turn off the grid. I don't need it anymore. Another first-time chatter, welcome. So glad that you are here. All right, let's go ahead and apply that forest floor texture. And the place to put it first is going to be right underneath wherever the tree stump is. So if I go ahead and start doing one stroke, first get some nice green in there, make it kind of do the whole, wherever there are those prop up branches, just kind of put in that. That's your first stroke. Then go in and do another one and just put it directly underneath. Just kind of circle the line work of the stump. Go ahead and do it again. And you'll see that there's a nice transition between the stump and that texture. So it kind of looks like there is this kind of connection to the land where the stump is. And you're going to do that same technique. Just do a couple brush strokes. I'll go ahead and just quickly go over each one. And it starts to kind of come together. You kind of see that there is some ground. Now, for the time of day and showing what kind of, like how translucent or opaque is the water, you can have it to where it's just, you can see this forest floor texture just underneath where each stump is, or you can make the whole thing kind of show that forest floor. It's up to you on how much of the forest or how much of the swamp floor you want to show and what kind of textures you want to use. Just to kind of keep it simple, I'm just going to use it underneath the stumps. But you can also do the negative space. And the negative space, when I say negative space, the term, what I'm talking about is wherever there's not a stamp. That's technically negative space. If you want to kind of, an example, the negative space would be like this right here. You'll notice that there are no stamps right there. Right here too, negative space. There are no stamps right here. Okay? That negative space is a great place to put in different types of stamps, more details, throwing in a different texture if you want to show a kind of different ground texture, things like that. So that's what I mean by negative space. So we go ahead and put that texture in. What you can also do is you can decide if you want to put, let's go ahead and look at our texture here. You could just take this dirt texture right here, this forest floor. It doesn't have any kind of branches, or it doesn't have any, what's the word I'm looking for? Any kind of fallen trees in it. This other one had a fallen tree. This one doesn't. So let's maybe just apply this, put it in the negative space. Just kind of create like a ring in the negative space. There we go. That looks nice. Just so that we can see that there is still some, you can see in the water just a little bit. There we go. That looks good. That looks nice. All right. Now, sometimes you can also portray like whether water is deeper or shallower. The way that you show depth in water is just take that same texture that you used for the base water and then just go to those advanced settings, HSBC, click filters, HSBC, and go ahead and take the brightness and just drop the brightness down. This is the trick. Now, this applies to any single map that you're making. It doesn't matter whether it's a world map, parchment, battle map. Whenever you're trying to show depth, whether it's in water or shadowing or height in terrain, contrast is the trick. So the darker that the texture is for the water, the deeper that water is. So if I go in and start painting in this part over here a little bit darker, and then just do multiple strokes, it's going to start to portray this illusion of depth. That's the trick. Okay. So if I wanted to show that this water was deeper in here, then I would just darken the texture and start applying it like this to show a little bit more depth. That's it. And wherever it's the deepest, apply it. So you'll notice that if you really want to show just how deep it gets, this is how you would do it. It's just apply more and more of that darker texture at 0.3 or 30%, because 0.3 is about the right amount. If you do one stroke, it will still be dark enough, but if you want it to be darker, you can by just applying another stroke. So that's pretty easy. Okay, let's go ahead and back to my history. I'm going to go ahead and delete that. I don't need all of that, so I'm just going to restore. I don't really want that to be completely dark. Well, actually, I actually kind of do like that a little bit. That looks nice. Maybe I can put it a little bit in there. There we go. Let's keep it that way. All right, that looks good. Now, when you are placing your little oxygen, the little roots that kind of act as kind of a snorkel, shall we say, when you place them, just place them around the root system of the tree. You don't have to put them out in the negative space. Just put them closer to the tree. It makes sense, right? Because that's what the tree is using to get the oxygen. So just make sure that those pneumatophores are placed close to the trees. Okay, now we also want to add in a canopy, okay? And a canopy is not hard to put together. Once you've kind of put all the texturing together, you put down a canopy. And the way that you make a canopy is easy, is you just take whatever tree that you want. Let me go ahead and just select a tree so you can see it. And I'll go ahead and put it back to its normal settings. I'll just go ahead and bring the brightness up. Change the opacity back to 100%. And I just took a tree of my choice. And one of the things I did is that I tried to pick a tree that has branches. It's not full foliage to where it's just a dark shadow, okay? Using bushes like these or trees like these allows you to kind of see where the sunlight goes through the foliage and exposes what's beneath it with a little bit of light. And so using one that has less foliage on it is really helpful. Just select it, make sure that it's a layer above your stump. You're going to bring the brightness all the way down, all the way to 0 with HSBC. And then I like to use about 0.25 or 25%. And that works well because you'll be able to, it's dark enough to where you can see that there's a shadow there, but it's not so dark that it completely obscures whatever stamps are beneath it. And once you've selected a tree, make sure that the tree covers the entire stump. It would be very weird if there was some light. Let me go ahead and scale the stump down so you can see, or scale the tree down, and kind of notice that once it's small enough, you'll notice that there's some shadow. You'll see some light that gets on the stump. Let me go ahead and scale it down quite a bit. You see real carefully here, you can see some of the light on the stump. You don't want that because the stump is solid. So make sure that you scale it up to where the shadow or that stamp covers the entire stump in shadow. Okay? Not too difficult, right? Easy to put together. And you just place each tree on top of each stump so that it's cover it, so you got that nice foliage. Let's go ahead and I'm going to real briefly just cover on human structures in here. Just a few moments just to give you ideas. One thing, because we've made the terrain, the environment have a focal point, that's when it's great to add human structure. Now, this is not on how to put human structures in a mangrove. The majority of the stream was to how to make the mangrove itself. But hey, when it comes to battle maps, it's nice to, what looks nice in any map is when you put a little bit of nature and a little bit of human-made structure as well. So I kind of just put together this makeshift kind of human structure so that you have something that's man-made or human-made in the build so that it kind of looks interesting. And we're going to observe that structure a little bit. Because it's in a mangrove and because mangroves are generally found within the tropics or subtropics, it's nice to use something that maybe some materials that you might find in the tropics. You notice that we've got this straw roof right here. This is just a roof composite, super easy to find. And all that I did was make sure that all those human stamps, or what I'm using to make a human structure, is below the canopy so that the shadow shows up on it. Notice that you can see lighter spots. So you can see the light here, but you can see the shadow from the canopy there. Okay, you absolutely want, because it's all about knowing height or depth. Because the trees, or the canopy of the trees, is the highest, going to be your highest point on this battle map, its shadow needs to be covering every stamp below it. And that includes whatever structures that you've put together. And then also, I've put together a dock system, a dock, and then some staircases that maybe lead up to maybe a loft, something upstairs. You'll notice that the staircase winds around the tree and then goes up. You could take a rug or a roof composite, scale it up real big and do the same thing that I did with the trees and kind of make a shadow that looks like a square that kind of represents maybe a structure that's above it. So a carpet would work just fine. Select it, bring the brightness to 0, or I'm sorry, the brightness to 0 so that it's pure black, and then bring it to 25% or 0.25. You can just punch that in the field, in the opacity field, and then make sure, again, that's at the top layer so that it kind of looks like there's maybe a structure above you, okay? And so I've added some land because your players are not just going to want to be able to just swim around in the water, right? Because that's no fun, right? If they're just swimming around, that makes the battle way too complex. You need to add some things for your players to like walk around on top of the water as well. So if they have to swim over, are they swimming in combat? Is movement hindered? Is it maybe you pushed an enemy combatant up here at this highest point, or maybe you're combating on the roof and you push them off into the water, maybe doing some damage, or makes them more susceptible to some kind of spell. So creating depth and creating a lot of interesting things for your players to interact with will be really, really, really helpful. Other things that you can do is that you can also create man-made stuff that's in the water, okay? And that's not too hard to do. You can just go ahead and take, let's say that you wanted to show a submerged, just like we showed that the propped up root system, we use the luminosity blend mode. We can do the same thing with anything we want to show underwater. So let's just take a broken boat. Oopsie. Just type in boat here real quick, a boat. One moment, boat. And there should be a wrecked boat right here. And we can go ahead and just take a boat. Let's bring the opacity down, make sure it's scaled to the same boat that we have there. You can make it just a tiny bit smaller because it's below the water, and so it's a little bit further away from you, but it wouldn't be much smaller, really. It wouldn't be much smaller. But let's just go ahead and place it in the water. Let's turn off that object shadow. That's usually going to be the default. You can just go to none and turn it off. Just look for shadow. Do that drop-down menu, click none. Go to the luminosity blend mode, right? Step 1. Let's put it at the most bottom layer. And remember, those shadows look a little dark, so it kind of pops out too much. So we go over to the HSBC and bring the contrast down. And what you have now is a submerged boat. And what's really nice is putting some of it in the shadow and some of it out to show overlapping and to show some depth. So if I place this maybe underneath the boat, I can do that. I can place it underneath a shadow. I could place it underneath this boat, maybe place it underneath right here, wherever you feel you want to place it. I like to put it in the shadow so it's with half in the shadows, half out, so it kind of looks nice. And this applies to anything that you want to put in the water. If you want to show that there's some coral in the water, I mean, technically coral wouldn't be in a mangrove, but you could, if you wanted to, you could. If you wanted to take like a plant, like a fern, you could totally take that and make sure the blend mode is at luminosity. Turn off the shadow, and again, change that contrast. And you might have to change the brightness, just depends. Like if you want it to show like it's a little bit further down, you can change the brightness as you see fit. Sometimes doing the contrast might not be enough because the texture beneath it is a bit darker. You might have to change those settings, brightness, darker, lighter, as you go. And then if you have this stamp, then you can go in and just place them periodically so that you have some shrubbery underneath the water as well. And again, just apply that to anything you want. You can throw in fish. See here, see how it's kind of bright right here? I have to bring the opacity down. That's going to happen sometimes. These look a little bright. You can bring the opacity down. Change the size. Okay. All right. Well, hey, the last thing to really do is I also want to actually mention how I did place the human structures with the grid. Just again, to push home that concept, use the grid. Notice that the boat is it's not perfectly parallel to the grid line, so it doesn't look awkward, but at the same time, I've rotated it to where it fits within these two cells right here, okay? Notice that this dock right here takes up an entire 2 cells, right? Same thing with this. This takes up 4 cells, okay? The grid is going to be your ally when doing the placement of things. Notice this boat too. It's not perfectly parallel to the grid, and so it doesn't look weird because, hey, it's the water. The boat is going to move. It's going to tilt off a little bit. It's going to meander. It's going to wander. That's why it's tied off, right? If the boat is perfectly parallel to the grids, that doesn't really show reality. In reality, those boats are going to be drifting off, and that's why they're tethered to that dock, right? And the way that I made that tethered rope is just with the path tool, okay? If you want to know how to do it, it's pretty easy. I just used the path tool and then added a hard, dark, small shadow to the path so that it looks like it's line work. That's it. It's nothing fancy. It doesn't look fantastic, but it doesn't have to be super fancy. That's right. Path tool for life. Okay. All right. So let's just do one last thing. Let's talk about our what kind of filters we're going to use. Let's go ahead and turn off all the filters, and I'll show you. When it comes to filters, it really depends on the map that you're making. Now, because most of my maps, I try to have a focal point, and then I have the terrain kind of encircle or frame the focal point, it's always nice to throw in a vignette. Okay, and what the vignette will do is help to accentuate the focal point by bleeding out or darkening the edges. So that vignette is a great way to help to further frame the focal point of the map. To further show to further kind of create that focal point, you can apply a spotlight filter. Let me turn that off so you can kind of see it. Notice how it got brighter in the center. I also want you to notice that to make sure that I didn't accidentally overdo making the light so bright that it kind of canceled out the shadows, I've put the spotlight at layer -5. Watch what happens when I put the spotlight at -5. What it kind of does is it kind of makes it a little bit too bright, and I don't really like the way it interacts with the shadows. So bringing it all the way down to layer -5 below the structures adds a little bit of light to the water and kind of makes that centerpiece pop out a little bit. So remember, filters use layers, so don't be afraid to use them. We also want to maybe apply a color filter to kind of cause things to blend better together. And I've used, let me go ahead and turn that on here. There we go. And this is a cold warm filter. And that cold warm filter is going to bring out, I like to use it when there's a lot of wood because the warms are the browns, the reds, and that cool warm filter brings out those browns. It brings out the warmer colors. And then it also adds a nice light purple feel to the cooler colors, which looks nice. Okay. And then last but not least, I like to add a clarity filter because the clarity filter is going to kind of cause it to pop out just a little bit, causing all the other filters and all the warms, the cools to kind of pop out a little bit more. And it just overall looks nice. So you can kind of see here the grid, everything's lined up. The filters look nice. And I also used the path tool to create the ropes that were kind of supporting this structure, these staircase, because the staircase is propped up by these kind of wooden poles that are popped out put into the tree, and then the ropes come down and are attached to those wooden staircases, those wooden stair pieces leading up to whatever might be at top, or just cut off because maybe it broke, whatever. All right, and I'll turn that grid off so you can kind of take a look at it. And if you like this If you like the way that it looks and you want to use this map, I'm going to save it right now so that you can go ahead and you can clone and edit it. If it seems a little blue to you, there's a really nice trick. You just take a color, and just like you did quick fill, and then just use 30%, just do apply, and you can really add a nice tint of green to it to give it a more green feel. Undo it. If you're not satisfied, bring it down to 15, and you can do it again. Let me press apply again, and it will add a little bit less green. So remember, colors are your best friend. They're not just to use a flat color. At a lower opacity, you can give a color tint to whatever your BG textures are, okay? So remember, color, use a little bit of green, and then you have this nice kind of tint, green tint if you're not satisfied with blue. All right, I'll go ahead and save this. All right, hey, thank you so much, everyone. Hey, next week, we're going to be doing how to create watermills. We're going to be going over how to create them. We're going to be going over what to use them for and what kind of encounter do you put at a watermill. What kind of scenarios could you have? Things like that at a watermill. So I'm excited about that. So I'll see you all next week. And please don't forget to join our Discord server. If you have a lot of questions, you should definitely join our Discord server because there's a lot of great people there who are really, really helpful. You can always ping a mentor and they will help you out if you have any questions, okay? So definitely join our Discord server. All right, well, hey, this is a little bit shorter, awesome. Go ahead and let me know in the chat or let me know in the video description if you're watching the video comments if you're watching on YouTube, what kind of watery biomes you might want to see next. What do you think? Lakes? Do you want to do an oasis? Do you want to do a delta, river delta? Do you want to do an oxbow lake? Let me know, okay? Because, hey, I listen to you guys. All right. Hey, thank you so much, everyone. Please stay safe and healthy, and I will see you all next week. Auf Wiedersehen. Hey, first time chat. Thank you. No problem. Talk to you later, guys.